It was early morning of June 1960. The air over Lake Bodom was still. The sun had barely risen. A few fishermen drifted quietly across the calm water. But what they were about to find would haunt Finland for decades. On the grassy shore, a small blue tent stood, torn to pieces. 3 teenagers lay dead nearby, stabbed, beaten, their belongings scattered across the ground. Only one boy was found alive, barely breathing. His face was covered in blood. No one had heard screams. No one had seen anyone leave. The peaceful lakeside had become a scene of true terror. But what really happened that night? Who would attack 4 sleeping friends in the middle of nowhere? And why did the killer vanish without leaving a single clue? Today, we'll talk about the Lake Bodom murders, a mystery that remains unsolved more than 60 years later. It was early June 1960. 4 friends decided to spend the weekend at Lake Bodom, a quiet lake in southern Finland. The group rode there on 2 motorcycles. On the first was Nils Gustafsson, 18, and his girlfriend, Malia Bjorklund. And bear with me on the pronunciations, it is what it is. She was only 15. On the second were Seppo Boisman, 18, and his girlfriend, Anja Maki, also 15. They planned their trip to celebrate Malia's birthday. Everyone looked forward to swimming, fishing, and relaxing near the water. On their way, they stopped at a small roadside kiosk to buy soda and a few bottles of beer. The woman at the counter asked where they were headed. When she heard they were going to Lake Bodom, she told them not to camp too close to the water. She said the fog there could get thick and cold. The group thanked her, but didn't think much of it. They got back on the road and continued towards the lake. By the time the friends had reached Lake Bodom, the air was cool and still. The lake stretched wide and silver under the evening sky. They chose a quiet spot on the southern shore, a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. The ground was flat and soft, a perfect place to camp. The 2 motorcycles were parked near the trees, their metal frames catching the fading light. The group worked together to pitch a small blue tent close to the edge of the water. They unpacked their things, sleeping bags, fishing rods, food, and a few bottles of beer. Everything felt calm and simple. After setting up, they relaxed. Seppo tried fishing from the shore, tossing his line into the still water. Nils joked with Malia while Anja sat nearby, brushing her hair and watching the reflection of the trees ripple across the lake. Malia took out her diary, her quiet habit on every trip. She liked writing down what she saw, what she felt, and what made the day feel special. They opened a few bottles, shared snacks, and talked about school, friends, and plans for the summer. Their laughter echoed softly over the water. Nothing about that evening seemed unusual or unsafe. As the night moved on, the light never truly faded. It was the season of the midnight sun, when the sky stays bright even in the middle of the night. The lake glowed faintly, covered in a thin layer of mist. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't exactly daylight either. It felt like the world was holding its breath, quiet and still. Inside the tent, the group settled down to rest. The air was cool, but gentle. The boys were a little drunk, laughing quietly. Seppo stepped out again with his fishing rod, unable to resist the calm water. At around 2 a.m., Malia made her last diary entry. Her neat handwriting described the peaceful lake and the others in the tent. She noted that the boys had been drinking and that Seppo was still fishing outside. But what no one could have guessed was that within a few hours, the same quiet tent would turn into one of Finland's most mysterious crime scenes. The next morning, June 5th, 1960, a local man named Esko Johannesson was walking towards the lake with his 2 sons. They planned to check on the campers they had seen earlier. From a distance, Esko noticed the blue tent on the southern shore, but it looked strange, like it had been flattened during the night. As they walked closer, something caught his eye: dark red stains across the fabric. At first, he thought it might be spilled food or paint, but as the morning light hit the tent, he realized the truth. This was definitely blood. When Esko lifted one corner of the torn tent, the sight froze him in place. The tent was shredded, ripped up from the outside. Blood was splattered on the ground, the canvas, and even on the nearby grass. It looked like a violent struggle had happened right there while the teenagers had slept. On top of the collapsed tent lay Nils Gustafsson, barely breathing. His face was covered in bruises, his jaw broken, and blood poured from deep cuts on his head. His shoes were missing, yet somehow he had remained alive. Just beside the tent was Malia Bjorklund, Nils' girlfriend. Her body lay partly outside, her injuries worse than the others. Inside the tent, Seppo Boisman and Anja Maki were found still in their sleeping bags, beaten and stabbed to death. The attack had been savage, fast, and silent. Esko rushed back to call for help, and when the police and emergency teams arrived, the area should have been sealed off immediately. But in 1960, crime scene procedures were not strict. Curious locals began to gather. Some walked close to the tent, others even touched things, stepping on footprints, moving items, and unknowingly destroying vital evidence. Investigators searched the area for clues, the murder weapon, anything that they could find, and they believed there had to have been a knife or possibly a blunt object involved, but it was never found. Several personal belongings were missing too: watches, wallets, even the motorcycle keys. It looked as if the killer had taken souvenirs or had tried to make the scene look like a robbery. When police began their investigation, confusion had filled the air. The crime scene at Lake Bodom looked like something from a nightmare. A torn tent, blood-soaked earth, and no clear trace of who had done it. Officers tried to make sense of the chaos that morning, but they were already too late. Much of the evidence had been stepped on by idiots, moved or even picked up by morons who were curious locals who wanted to see what happened. Don't touch things! Sorry, it should be very obvious, right? Anyways, still the police worked with what they had. The tent had been slashed from the outside, meaning the killer or killers never entered it before attacking. The victims had been struck through the fabric while they were sleeping inside, trapped and unable to see who was hurting them. The shape of the cuts showed quick, forceful movements, as if the attacker knew exactly what they were doing. Inside and around the tent, officers found signs of a desperate struggle. Sleeping bags were tangled. Blood patterns showed that at least one of the teenagers had tried to crawl out, and it looked like a pure panic, a movement where survival instincts kicked in, but escape wasn't possible. And then came a fairly bizarre detail. Neil Gustafsson's shoes. The only surviving boy's shoes were missing from the scene. Days later, police found them about 1 kilometer away, or 0.6 miles away, covered in blood that wasn't only his. It was the kind of clue that raised more questions than it answered. Why would the killer take his shoes so far? And how did they end up there after such a violent attack? Meanwhile, a few witnesses stepped forward. A group of bird watchers and a 14-year-old boy had been near the lake early that morning, between 4 to 6 a.m. They all described seeing a tall blonde man with a square jaw walking near the campsite. He seemed calm, almost too calm, as if he belonged there. Police quickly created a composite sketch showing the face of this mysterious man. But there was a problem. No one knew who he was. He had vanished as quietly as he had appeared. That morning, Nils Gustafsson was the only one still breathing. His face was swollen, his jaw broken, and his skull fractured in several places. He was barely conscious, lying tangled on top of a collapsed tent. Doctors later said it was a miracle he survived at all. For days, Nils couldn't speak. His injuries made it almost impossible for him to open his mouth to actually form words. When police finally questioned him, he had no memory of what had happened that night. It was as if his mind had sealed the memory away to protect him from reliving that horror. Weeks later, detectives tried something unusual: hypnosis. They hoped it might unlock his memories. Under trance, Nils described seeing only a dark figure, a man with a strong chin and blonde hair, moving outside of the tent before everything went black. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. That description matched the mysterious man the bird watchers had seen earlier that morning, the man with the square jaw. As the story spread, panic grew across Finland. The idea that a killer was still out there, unseen and unknown, sent fear through every small town. Police were flooded with tips, rumors, or even just theories. Some people claimed they saw strangers near the lake that night. Others pointed to angry locals who hated campers. You gonna really take out a bunch of teenagers because you hate campers? I don't know, that's just like Jason sort of stuff, but I'm not making light of it, but it really is. It's like, why would you hate campers? That they're camping? But the investigation was already a mess at this point. The crime scene had been trampled by visitors who were dumb. Evidence had gone missing. Even eyewitnesses started to contradict each other. Some said the man was blonde. Others said brown-haired. Some said he wore light clothes. Others remembered dark. The truth began to blur beneath a flood of confusion. Weeks would then turn into months. Leads ran dry, and slowly, the Lake Bodom murders became more of a legend than an active case. People whispered about it in cafes and around campfires. Parents warned their kids not to camp too close to the woods. Everyone in Finland knew about it, yet no one knew the answer. Years would pass. The police tried reopening the case several times, but nothing new ever resurfaced. By the 1970s, the case was officially deemed cold, but it never truly fades away. Every few years, someone would write an article or start a rumor, and the story would come back to life. For more than 40 years, the Lake Bodom murders have remained an unsolved nightmare. But in the early 2000s, everything would change. New technology gave detectives a reason to actually reopen these dusty old files. Forensic science had become more advanced, and what couldn't be tested in 1960 could now be examined with incredible detail. When investigators rechecked the evidence, they focused on one strange item: Nils Gustafsson's shoes. They were found a kilometer away from the tent, soaked in blood. This time, tests showed something that was fairly shocking. The blood belonged to the victims, but none of it was Nils' own. To police, this was a major clue. If Nils hadn't bled into his own shoes, did that mean he wasn't the victim, but maybe the killer? The theory was quite disturbing, but it seemed to fit. The once silent survivor now looked suspicious. It was 2004. Nils was now in his 60s, gray-haired, retired, and living a quiet life. Then, out of nowhere, detectives arrived at his door. They told him he was being arrested for the murder of his 3 friends at Lake Bodom. The news shocked Finland. After decades of mystery, police had finally named a suspect. The one man everyone thought was just a victim who survived. In court, prosecutors painted a fairly dark story. I mean, the whole thing is pretty dark, but yeah. They claimed that on that June night in 1960, the group had been drinking and arguing. A fight broke out between Nils and his best friend Seppo. Malia, Nils' girlfriend, tried to stop it, but instead, she sided with Seppo. Humiliated and angry, prosecutors said Nils left the tent. Later, filled with rage, he returned with a knife and a rock. They claimed he attacked his friends in a blind fury, slashed the tent, and killed them one by one. Afterward, they said he staged the scene, throwing away evidence, leaving his shoes behind, and pretending to be unconscious when rescuers found him. Bit strange about the jaw, though. The motive apparently was jealousy and shame. Nils' lawyers told a completely different story. They said it was impossible for Nils to be the killer. His injuries were real and severe. His jaw broken, his skull fractured, and he nearly died. How could someone that hurt overpower 3 healthy people? They also pointed out that Nils had no cuts or scratches from crawling through the slashed tent fabric, something a killer would likely have. And most importantly, the eyewitnesses describe a tall blonde man with a square jaw, while Nils' hair was brown and his build just did not match. The defense argued that the real killer had simply vanished, and that Nils had been haunted long enough by the trauma of that night. After months of debate, the jury finally made their decision. In 2005, Nils Gustafsson was found not guilty of all charges. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. For Nils, it was both a relief and a heartbreak. He had lived through the horror, lost his friends, and now had to defend himself against the same crime. Plus, you know how annoying it would be to have this happen? Not just annoying, but just and then a new generation comes up and they're like, you did it. And it's like, what the fuck? Anyways, later he sued the Finnish government for wrongful imprisonment and won 45,000, I believe, euros in damages. Over time, as memories faded and witnesses passed away, one thing never changed: the mystery of Lake Bodom. Police files were revisited, journalists searched for clues, and the locals continued to whisper about what may have really happened that cold June night in 1960. Many theories were born, each darker and stranger than the last. The first one, Carl Gillstrom owned a small roadside kiosk not far from the lake. He was known around Espoo as a man with a bad temper, someone who hated campers. Don't know what the hell that dude's problem is, but whatever. Anyways, so locals told stories of him cutting tents with a knife, throwing rocks at strangers, and even firing warning shots into the air to scare people away from his woods. Carl lived only 800 meters from where the teenagers had camped, about half mile, on that night of the murders. But the big thing is his wife had claimed he was home. But later, both she and his daughter changed their statements. 9 years later, in 1969, Carl had a drunken breakdown. Witnesses said he confessed to the killing of the teens at Lake Bodom. The same evening, he walked into the water and then drowned himself not far from the crime scene. To many, this sounded like a confession of guilt. But the police said there was no solid proof, no weapon, no physical evidence linking him to the scene. His death was recorded as a suicide, not an admission of murder. Yet for decades, locals would say it was Carl. It had to be him. The next one was actually a man named Hans Osman, a German immigrant with a strange past and a stranger personality. He often bragged about being an ex-Nazi, a ex-KGB agent, and even a spy. Most people thought he was a liar trying to sound important, but his timing was suspicious. Just 2 days after the murders, Osman appeared at Helsinki Hospital with his hands trembling and stains on his clothes that looked like blood, though he claimed it was red paint. The nurses said he acted nervous and refused to answer any questions. The police never tested the clothes. His girlfriend gave him an alibi, saying he'd been home. The case against him kind of went nowhere, but Osman enjoyed the attention, and for years, he dropped cryptic hints, telling people he knew things about Lake Bodom. Really, he's just an asshole. When he died in 1997, he whispered something about crimes that should have never happened, and even then, no one could tell if he was confessing or just feeding his own legend. Another name actually resurfaced in prison years later, and this one was a confessing criminal. This man was a small-time thief. He told other inmates that he was the Lake Bodom killer. The confession caused a storm, obviously, but when police looked deeper into it, it made no sense. In 1960, the man named Penty would have been around 15 years old, too young, too small, and too far from the scene. He was likely seeking attention or trying to impress others. His story changed every time he told it, and soon he even admitted that it was just a straight-up lie. Wow, a thief lying, who would have guessed? Still, the rumor stuck. In a case built on shadows and uncertainty, even false stories continue to just find a place within this legend. And then came the strangest idea of all. Some people pointed to Niels Gustafsson's earlier statement that he remembered a dark figure with glowing red eyes. Was it a memory, a dream, or something beyond human? In later retellings, this became the Lake Bodom creature, a mix of Finnish folklore and fear. Locals began speaking of a shape that haunted the lake, half man, half beast, watching from the trees. Of course, there's no evidence of this creature, but the idea refused to die, blending myth with mystery until it became part of the story itself. The Lake Bodom murders changed Finland forever. They inspired books, films, and songs, turning it into one of Europe's most haunted mysteries. So, what really happened that night? The most puzzling thing about the Lake Bodom murders is how many questions still hang in the air. Was the killer a local, hiding his guilt amongst familiar faces, or a stranger passing through the woods unseen? Could it have just been someone the teens already knew and trusted? And what about the murder weapon, never found despite countless searches? Then there's the haunting rumor, the blonde man seen watching silently at the funeral. Who was he, and why did no one ever identify him? Looking closely at all the evidence, the most plausible explanation still points towards Carl Gillstrom, or perhaps another local man driven by sudden rage. The violent slashing of the tent, the randomness of the blows, and the lack of stolen valuables all suggest a moment of uncontrolled anger, not a carefully planned crime. Gillstrom had a history of attacking campers and a deep hatred for outsiders. His drunken confession before drowning himself near the lake years later feels a little too coincidental to just completely ignore it, obviously. Yet because police failed to secure the scene, vital clues were lost forever. Even if he was found guilty, the proof vanished in that morning mist. Still, there's another strange detail, one that keeps the door open to darker possibilities. Survivor Niels Gustafsson once described seeing a dark figure with glowing red eyes. Maybe it was a trick of trauma or the dim light of Finland's midnight sun, but to some locals, it hinted at something older, a presence from the woods, part of ancient Finnish folklore. Over the years, campers have whispered of a shadow-like being moving near the southern shore, silent and watching. There's no hard evidence of any cryptid, but stories often grow from fear, and fear itself can leave a lasting mark on a place. To this day, Lake Bodom remains calm on the surface, but beneath its quiet waters lies a mystery that refuses to rest, part fact, part fear, and part something no one can quite explain. And yet, here I am. I'm going to maybe explain something here. As always, I like to break in at the end and kind of discuss the idea here. First things first, this is a different country, obviously, than the United States, but I was actually talking with my girlfriend about this the other day. She likes to hike without any countermeasures. No, that's a terrible idea. And also camping without countermeasures is a terrible idea. That's what I think personally. So here's the thing, right? Let's start this process, or let's start this thought experiment off this way. Most murders that are unsolved, First, most murders that are solved are because the person knew them, right? It's somebody that somebody knew, got wronged in some way, jilted lover, business gone bad, some sort of thing like that, right? Or somebody said something, or you're drinking together. Stuff happens, you take each other out. It's a problem, but it's human nature, right? Most of the ones that remain completely unsolved are because it's just somebody who drifted through town, right? We would all like to think that, especially in today's day and age, oh, well, there's cameras and there's all this way to test or yada, yada, yada. But you have to remember something. Let's say you're just a total psycho, right? And you're like, I'm going to go across the U.S. from New York to California, and I'm going to stop off in a small town in Missouri and just take somebody out, right? Odds are, if you've never committed a crime before, you didn't do 23andMe, or you've never really had your genetic information categorized in any capacity, even if they find hair, even if they have your DNA, it won't matter unless you reoffend, and then they can catch you in that way. The point is that it happens, especially in 1960s. People could drift through an area, take somebody out, and then leave the area, and they would never be discovered. It just wouldn't happen because there was no way to test it, and there's no way to really know who this person even was. Like, if you don't know the victim and you're just doing it at random, I mean, you're a sick puppy to begin with, but there's nothing to connect you to the actual scene besides the fact that, yeah, there was just some blonde dude with a square jaw. You know how many blonde dudes with square jaws there are in Finland? That's like every Finnish person. So it's just like that type of situation. There's really no good way to. I know I dunk on the police and the locals for being stupid and destroying the crime scene, but the point is that you couldn't find somebody. There's no way to find somebody if they didn't know the victims, and that's what, like, these older cases, they're always going to be like, well, how did they escape? It's like, because A, there weren't cameras, like nobody was around to like take pictures of this, and it's like I'm not saying like, you know, give it this. It doesn't take that long to take somebody out. We're very fragile creatures, so to speak. The human body it's a glass cannon. Like, you hit right in the right area, it's done. It's just how it happens. So what really could have happened here? I mean, you have to also remember in Central Europe, schizophrenia is actually typically higher. Or I don't know if it's still psychopathic, if they consider that to be like the actual wording, but the traits and tendencies of that are higher in this area. The question is why? Well, if you look back in history, as far as like raiding parties and kind of how everything was happening, detachment from, I guess, emotional and moral questioning was probably a little better, and it would allow you to survive better than if you were super empathetic and all this stuff. So life used to be much more harsh than it is now, but those genetics still continue on to this day. So what you could have is literally a drifter coming through the area. They have already snapped long ago, and then they attack these teenagers. Now, the shoes thing, again, to me, that is, I don't know if the guy who took himself out by drowning, obviously that is a possibility. I mean, it's pretty clear Carl was a little unhinged, so to speak, but the reality is that being unhinged in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's just whether he did something or not. Now, breaking down, confessing, and then drowning yourself, who knows what that was about? He could have actually been confessing to doing it. But the point, because I mean, he could be equally, you know, struggling with mental health issues. But the point is that it doesn't take much. It takes one person, and again, go to Seattle, right? If you want to, just walk around, look at the people who are, you know, living outside and are having issues in life. It's typically, whether it be drug or mental health related, they're passing through areas all the time. And it's kind of like one of these situations here as well. Could somebody have, like, this isn't just a new phenomenon. People pass through areas all the time, and they could be violent. That's just how it goes down. So to me, it could have been Carl. Carl is very likely going to be the most, I guess, applicable person here of who could have done it. But it's also, again, if he didn't do it, then it's just equally as likely there was just somebody who was having a schizophrenic breakdown, may have attacked the teenagers because they saw something different or hearing voices. They were completely uninhibited concerning their aggression levels, and boom, that's all it took. And then that's also, it's like, okay, well, why the shoes like a kilometer away, right? Who knows why? Right? If you're having a mental break to this capacity, you might just grab stuff. You're not there to rob, you're just there to take out, and then the shoes start talking to you saying, oh, take me with you, or something like that. And boom, you're taking the shoes with you before you realize what you're doing, and you drop them off a kilometer away. It's just, to me, with the damage, like breaking your jaw to cover up a murder and fracturing your skull and almost dying, to me, that doesn't really seem to fall in line with this guy taking out 3 people. And yeah, it could have been just a knockdown, drag-out fight, and then he passed out afterwards, but it just doesn't seem that likely. This seems like all 4 of them were attacked by somebody that they were just not ready to deal with. And that's the thing. And this is just me talking to you. Maybe this is just how I view the world, but any stranger, I guess, is not your friend, right? They're not your friend. They don't know you. They could be your friend. They could be somebody you come to rely on, right? Like all friends were strangers at one point. But you have to put them through a vetting process. And that vetting process involves you being safe. You having the upper hand in a situation that could arise. So if you go camping or you go hiking or you do anything like that, just bring a countermeasure with you. And again, this is Finland, so I'm not really sure what the rules are. But again, Carl is firing warning shots off in the air, right? So obviously you can own those things. So it's just like, my thing is like, just have a way to protect yourself. It's better to need it and not, it's better to have it, not need it, than need it and not have it. And when you're out there camping, you don't know who's going to run across you or want to, mess with your tent. And it's like, dang, dude, that was a really bad thing you just did, stabbing through my tent. Here's a piece of lead flying at your face. It's a better way, if you get attacked, to just deal with the problem and then survive, right? Because they're going to do something like that. They're going to do that to somebody else as well. I don't know. That's just my take on it. And I know I'm like lecturing you like a dad right now. Anyways, I just want you to be safe out there. And that's the best way to do it. But I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this. If you did, then please leave a like, as it helps get the video out there. And subscribe is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and other channel links like Roanoke Gaming down in the comments. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Gradius, Monkey Man, Scrungle, and Invictus Echo. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga, Eddie the Yeti, Dragon Master Knight, and Hope Blighton. Thank you guys as well. At the first-hand accounts, we have the Soggy Anglerfish. And at the second-hand accounts, we have Troy, Fred Rush, Stutz, Pouches, and CDD, I believe. CDD. Yes. Anyways, thank you guys for your support. And to everyone else, I do appreciate y'all as well. Your help goes a long way towards helping out this channel and keeping it running, so thank you. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.